so I can show off. There we go. We got your face now on screen. Hello again.
Terrific. That's exciting.
Yeah. So, last time Brent and I talked, apparently he was a little disappointed. He expected there to be a lot more political arguments. um, but of course, we were that time looking to talk about world building and story design and so on, stuff like that, all nerd shit.
Yeah,
Today we're
the
also
actually important stuff that I do. not
but
not not the bullshit I waste my time with on Facebook.
but I am interested in hearing about um your experience of religion and so on, because I've learned a little bit about not but I haven't actually learned much about Buddhism. Um
Well, you learned the right way to pronounce it, so
uh
that's good.
I've learned a little bit from a channel called School of Life, which, if you're familiar with Elaine, you'll know everything I know about Buddhism is wrong. Um,
Mhm.
it,
Yeah, I
um,
wasn't gonna say, but
yep. I also
I'm familiar with
learned
that channel.
I also learned a little bit about the Tao, which is the branch of Eastern religion I'm most interested in, though all three of the big ones are particularly interesting because I've heard it brought up, I've heard it not just described, but it seems to be rather true that they're all rather kin to absurdism and nihilism, or they seem to be.
I
Um,
mean, I would say there's definitely some overlap. There's certain aspects of absurdism and Western nihilism that are definitely not shared by Eastern religions.
mhm.
But in the strictest sense, that like I was on Destiny's stream and I told him I was a moral nihilist, and he said he didn't believe me because I was making moral arguments. But it's more that I think there is such a fundamentally different core perspective between Eastern and Western religions that what happens is that when an Eastern religion runs into problems like the problem of nihilism, um, it reacts with it in a completely different way, and totally different conclusions are drawn, essentially from the same data. Um, so it's basically, and I think a lot of it goes back to the fact that Western philosophy came out of Christianity,
Right.
and Christianity has a very specific way that it sees the world. And even if you have rejected Christianity and you're a nihilist, or some sort of hard determinist or something, like your brain is still formatted like a Christian, and as a result, um, the way that you look at the world, even without that religion, is still heavily informed by that, and so it can lead to a lot of misunderstandings, I think, just about certain concepts and certain realities.
Absolutely. It's part of what makes learning about Eastern philosophy so interesting, is because, like, we're used to monotheism. Um, instead of You can't even refer to Eastern religions as pantheism. It's the closest we have is shamanism.
I think so. I think that there is a definite. So it's very interesting because the word shaman comes from shramana, which in Hindu religion was the man who went outside, literally went outside the village beyond the pale. So if you think about the original, like, early settlements that they might have had, you essentially had the village itself, you know, divided into four different areas, and each of those
Oh, real
areas
quick.
within the village was each of the four major castes in Hinduism.
Yep.
Which priests, warriors, traders, and laborers.
All right.
And then
Before
the shaman, was the person who went out beyond the pale, beyond the actual physical barrier, to be totally alone,
uh,
and find out who they really were.
All right.
You know,
So before we go into all of this, how about you introduce yourself once again, just so we
yeah,
have that.
that sounds wonderful. So, hello, folks. My name is Brent Lengel. I am a poet, playwright, former activist with Occupy Wall Street, and a Ringo Award-nominated comic creator of Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, which is a series. We just funded the 4th issue on Kickstarter, and I'm getting ready to do the first trade. I'm also about to launch 2 new series coming up, and I talk about the I'm also a former men's leader with Soka Gakkai, which is the world's largest lay Buddhist organization. We're a Japanese sect, a Nichiren sect, and we are currently in 192 countries, which is really exciting. Before that, I also studied Buddhism in college, and not just Buddhism, but Asian philosophy in general. Read the Upanishads, read the Tao Te Ching, read Chuang-Tzu, the Inner Chapters. So I am very much a layperson, but I am a more educated layperson than most that you'll run into. So just so you know, so I'm not just spewing this stuff.
Yeah. Yep. And just so you know, if I am a bit behind on responding, I was just doing an audio test.
Totally cool.
All right. I just wanted to make sure you weren't blowing out anyone's ears and people could still hear you. That is
Both,
a
both of those are very, very important.
yeah, that is a thing I have problems doing. All right, so I know you talked to RJ from who does the Aporia project, the um which I've not actually gotten to talk to him a whole lot. I am familiar with him. He's one of those very formal philosophy type
Mhm.
people. I, on the other hand, am an idiot. That's how I do philosophy. Um, it's
Might
actually
make you a little bit better at philosophy than the formal philosophy people, to tell you the truth.
yeah, it's I would like to believe so. It's why things like the Tao are so fascinating to me because
Mhm.
I'm used to where when you start talking about absurdism and nihilism and all of them, people getting into the academic jargon and getting into prop logic and stuff like that. I don't. They start making propositions, and I just go, please stop talking.
Yeah.
Um, you can start, you can ask about morality and so on, but like, what, yeah, one of the big influential philosophers for me is Camus.
Mhm.
Um, which I believe it might have been the myth of Sisyphus that sort of opens with there is only one question,
Mhm.
or it's the most important question which exists in philosophy is why shouldn't I kill myself, or something to that
Whether
effect.
or not to commit suicide.
Yeah, and man, when I first heard that one, that actually became a really powerful tool to fight depression. Because
Mhm.
let me tell you, applying that in an absurd fashion, imagine being really depressed and being like, I need to do the dishes, and then you can't get yourself to do the dishes, and so you're like, well, I could do the dishes or I could kill myself, in which case you go, hold on, that's a bit much, wait a minute.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you. So I have dealt with major depression most of my life, all of my adult life, and I have dealt with suicidal thoughts and suicidal ideation. So it's definitely something that I completely understand.
Mhm. And now that is one of those areas actually, um absurdism, nihilism is almost entirely built around, well, nihilism and stoicism and similar philosophies are almost entirely built around despair, depression, rejection of faith, and so on. And they almost all come back to the last idea of nothing being meaningful. And this is actually one of those areas I'm interested in, if there is any sort of allegory to in, or any sort of um similarity to anything that you can think of from Buddhism or any of the Eastern religions that you're familiar with.
Sure. Though I'm not sure Stoicism. Well, maybe Stoicism. I may be
Stoic
getting Stoicism confused uh, with Epicureanism, because I know the Epicureans were very similar to the Buddhists.
so
Um,
Epicureans were the ones who they're a form of hedonist, and they're like they were more about the simple pleasures than most other hedonists. But
mhm.
Stoicism, one of the best known lines from the school of Stoicism is, can you see no more roads? Is there no way out? That you have one path left, simply turn over your wrist. Um, it's a call to, it's a call on those who are in despair. Like,
Yeah,
if you think you're stuck, if you think there's literally no other way out, you've got
you
one
still,
road left.
yeah.
Um, it's a very dark philosophy.
Hmm.
I'm personally drawn to those sorts of things,
Hmm.
the idea of Stoics, specifically the call to suicide, or not the call to suicide.
Hmm.
That's a very inaccurate way of putting it, because the idea of a statement like that is not to get you to kill yourself. It's to
Right.
get you to
Certainly not.
realize you're free.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, that you are not as constrained by the external factors as you think you are.
Yeah, and I hear about Daoism and Buddhism, not so much Confucianism.
Hmm.
Jesus, I hate that word. Um, but I don't hear about the more despair stuff from Confucianism, but like the story of Gautama, even him
Hmm.
specifically, he meets a starving man, he meets a sick man, he meets a dying man,
Yeah,
like that is almost a call to despair,
I
or
definitely
to
think in a
face
way it
despair.
is. Yeah. So the Buddha was very much about not covering up things, like not denying the negatives in life, the so-called negatives. Um, so I know that, so the despair aspect, and this is really funny because like Soka Gakkai, my sect, we kind of have a reputation for being relentlessly positive. Like when I first joined the organization, I was like on one of those retreats, and I was just like, man, these people are like really, really happy. Did I join a cult? And then I'm like, wait a minute. No, I'm just miserable most of the time, and it's fine. I'm a goth. So, but like, the thing is that okay. So this actually comes down to a. I was hinting at this before, that I think the despair aspect, like people talk. There's a philosopher who is said to have come up with something very, very similar to Buddhism, but he is known for being like incredibly depressing. And RJ, actually, we talked about him briefly. I'm blanking on his name right now. He's got crazy freaking white hair. He looks a little like
Kierkegaard.
no, not well. Kierkegaard does also have crazy white hair, but no, not Kierkegaard. Schopenhauer. That's who
Ah,
I was thinking of.
yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Schopenhauer, one of the biggest glooms in Western philosophy.
yeah, and he's that way because he basically kind of came up with Buddhism on his own a little bit,
Hmm.
but from a Christian background. So this is really important to understand. All right, so there are basic theories of the universe, like just of how things work. And they tend to be heavily embedded within a culture. So, for instance, in the West in particular, we are very much a technological culture. We make things. And so we tend to think of humans as a kind of technology. So we we started out with like Greek myths, like Prometheus shaping men from clay,
Yeah.
which then you see echoed in like the story of Genesis and the Garden of Eden and everything. And God, creates man, Adam and Eve, and breathes into them, breathes life into them. So we sort of understand our relationship to the universe by analogy with some kind of artifice. Um, and as a result, at first we were children of God. And so it was God built us and God loves us, and we must simply fulfill our purpose, which is to love God or whatever. And that is our purpose. That is what gives life meaning, because humans have a natural desire and drive to find meaning in our lives and in our existence. Um, Now, the Western religion tended to separate things into very strict dichotomies as a result of this idea. Um, like, uh, Usually it's like kind of expressing the sacred and the profane. And so what we wound up having was, we had Christianity running things for so long, since the fall of the Roman Empire all the way up until you know uh, the beginnings of I guess the Enlightenment. um, Christianity ran the show, and we had that whole concept of God as this eternal, benevolent father figure who also watched and knew everything that we did all the time, which is horrifying if you think about it too long. Um, or at the very least, very constraining. So then we had the Enlightenment, which came after a series of religious wars that nearly destroyed all of Europe. And people began to question the power of the church and the validity of this narrative that we are children of God. Um, but what happened was that as the Enlightenment, they essentially, what they did was they came around and they got rid of God, but we're still here. And so suddenly, we are a machine without a maker, without purpose.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, it's like the Western atheist concept kind of came along and said, okay, there's no sacred, everything is profane. And so, like, then they start talking about like drives and blind energy. And so suddenly, human beings, to a Westerner who has rejected Christianity, we are essentially the subject of blind forces fluked into existence in an indifferent universe for, I don't know, 80 or so years from cradle to grave, and then we get locked up in a dark room forever. Like that seems to be the supposition at the core of sort of the Western atheist outlook. And so you get some very, very depressing philosophy, from people like Schopenhauer, from people like Nietzsche. I like a lot of his philosophy, but it also,
Yeah.
and a lot of his philosophy was trying to combat nihilism, because he saw nihilism as like the biggest threat.
I'm glad that you recognize that, because so many people don't recognize that, like, to Nietzsche, to Camus, to
Mm-hmm.
Derrida, to just about everybody, it except for Jesus, there's like one person who I can think of as a philosopher who was just like, no, nihilism is, this is it. But
Yeah.
to most other philosophers, nihilism was poison.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, to a lot of them. And the problem was not actually the nihilism. The problem. Hang on, can you hear me?
yeah.
Okay, yeah, my Discord just froze and it says not responding, so I may be stuck for a minute or two, but I'm going to keep going. The problem was not the nihilism. There we go. I'm back.
All
The
right.
problem was actually their their supposition underneath everything. So, as I said, originally we had, and Alan Watts puts it like this. He said we had essentially the ceramic model of the universe with God as the pot maker, and then we had the fully automatic universe. And so we are essentially ghosts driving meat suits that came from nowhere and will return to nothing. And this is where the major feelings of existential despair come from, for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But this is not the only way of looking at the universe and at our place in it and our relationship to it. So, a couple of other really big models. One is the Chinese model. and you can call the Chinese model the organic model. So a baby, a toddler in China would not say to his parents, "How was I made?" He would say, or she would say, "How did I grow?" And like we use phrases in the West like, I came into this world. No, you didn't. You came out of it.
Right.
So the concept being is that and this is Alan Watts translating this masterfully for someone without an Eastern background. You kind of want to think about an apple tree apples and the earth peoples,
Yeah.
the
And
universe eyes.
one of
Mhm.
the interesting things is that this lines up actually much better with like my personal understanding of evolution. It's
Mhm.
not because like you're talking about how instead of thinking we were made and then something, instead
Yeah,
it's we're growing. We're still growing every day. The tree gets a new branch with new leaves, which becomes new trees.
yeah, exactly. And so like in that model, and we'll get to the Hindu conception of the universe because that's really important to understanding Buddhism in particular. Buddhism, especially my sect, Mahayana Buddhism, essentially being a fusion of Hinduism stripped for export, which is the original Theravada Buddhism, fused with Taoist thought. um, so what you had happen essentially, so that's the organic model, that so to the extent of like that life is just something that happens within the universe and we're part of it, and we exist in relation to everything else. So we're not strangers in this world, we're not an accident, we're the idea of us being at the mercy of an indifferent world doesn't even make any sense in that case, because it's not an indifferent world. Like, we are as much a part of this world as everything else. We're not a ghost driving a meat suit, which I think, by the way, is much more logical than the Western way of thinking about it. But people, our common sense in the West, again, because of the early impact of Christianity, just doesn't seem to, the wires don't cross.
Yeah, it for some reason people still like even atheists seem to operate as though we are a machine with agency
Yeah.
instead of a seed that got hit by lightning and now thinks about itself too much.
Exactly. So then you've got the Hindu conception of the world, which is probably the oldest, and in my opinion, I think it's the most correct. I'm very attracted to the Chinese organic model for a number of reasons, but the Hindu concept of the universe is essentially the dramatic model. So again, like Hindus, they have a polytheistic pantheon and such, and some Hindu sects get really attached to their gods, which is very unfortunate because they're missing the entire point. Um, but essentially, like the idea at the core of Hinduism is that everything is Brahman. Brahman being this undifferentiated stuff, the deep down stuff, the ground of being in the universe, to use a term that the Christians have used for God.
So
um
Brahman would be the canvas.
yeah, but
He would
not
be the
not
canvas
just.
and the paint and the artist, but
Yeah,
when you conceptualize it, you would think of Brahman as just the canvas because the limitation of the mind and so on.
yeah, exactly. Or I would say, like, Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage, and the men and women are merely players. Brahman is the stage, the men, the stage, the players, the director, the riggings,
Brahman
the sets, the audience,
Brahman
everything.
Brahman's the DM.
Yes, exactly. And so Brahman is like, Brahman would be the DM if he was playing if he was if it was playing Dungeons and Dragons with itself, and there were no other players.
Oh, so
So
it's Brahman's just a writer. I actually really like that.
Yeah, I like that too, particularly as a writer. Hey. So, anyway, like the concept of it is essentially that if you read the Upanishads, which are commentaries on the Vedas, I swear to God, this will connect. Um, One of my favorite stories. It tells and retells the creation of the universe over and over again in different and conflicting ways. The point of which is not for you to take any of these stories literally, but for these stories taken together to be a way to talk about that which is almost impossible to talk about and conceptualize, um, because of the limitations of language and perspective and everything. Um, so my favorite story in this, and I think you'll appreciate this because you strike me as just about as goth as me,
Yep.
is in the beginning there was death. And death said, I am death. Let me equip myself with a body. So death creates a body. And then death is hungry because he's death. And so he proceeds to create children to eat and continues this whole process of creating more and more children so that death can devour them. Now, beside being totally metal, let's think about that in a sort of real sense. Like, it is as if at one point the entire universe was one, entirely one, entirely connected, and at some point this undifferentiated whole becomes self-aware. Well, if it exists, something else must exist, because first of all, I, the awareness, self-consciousness is by
Oh,
necessity an individual experience, but also if you exist, something that is not you must exist. You must have an environment, and so, but it's already everything, and so it splits. And then that splits, and that splits, and that splits, and that splits, and suddenly you have me, you, the chair, the rock, the internet, everything. And through this whole process, death, the force of death is going and returning everything to the whole that it was in the beginning.
oh my God.
And eventually, let's say death is going to swallow absolutely everything up. Well, yeah, but that begs the question, because if this self-awareness happened once, it can happen again. Something can come from nothing. Now, what you'll notice is that this is surprisingly similar to how modern physicists view the creation of the universe with the Big Bang.
Well,
And like the force of entropy within the universe.
yeah, I don't know if I quite agree with that one, but
Mm-hmm.
because I don't think so. One of the things that I've learned from
Mm-hmm.
science-minded individuals that I know is
Yeah,
that you don't speculate on the nature of the universe. You
yeah,
don't speculate on where the beginning came from, because that's not a valuable well, okay, it's a valuable
yeah.
question and somebody speculates on it, but don't like, you can fill in the blank with whatever you like, because we're never going to have a proper answer. It's why I was like,
Certainly not.
when you said it's like it's how physicists understand things. But
Well, keep
I
in mind,
I can,
I'm simply talking about the current theory, like with regard to the Big Bang and entropy.
yeah,
Um, so yes, I do agree you don't want to speculate on things, and I would actually say, I think the prevailing theory of time right now is a B theory, in that time is an illusion. Um, but my point is, and again, this is not a story that you want to take literally, but what we're
right.
going to do is we're going to use that to understand the concept of Brahman. So if you imagine Brahman as everything, the dreaming Godhead, Brahman sleeps. And as Brahman sleeps, you know, Brahman has dreams. And we are all the dream of Brahman, essentially. And every so often, Brahman wakes up. This is what's called a kalpa. Everything, the dream ends. Kind of looks around, is like, okay, that was a great, and goes back to sleep. And the whole process goes over again. And they have this broken up into 4 different kinds of kalpas, and some are better than others, like some of the better dreams. By the way, we are supposedly living, according to the Hindu calendar, we are supposedly living in the worst one, which, yeah, that tracks.
Probably not. I
Yeah.
don't know. This is the kalpa that happens just before Brahma has to go to work.
Oh God, who's forcing Brahma to go to work?
I'm sorry. You
But
said
no,
it's
that's
like
really
Brahma
great.
wakes up and
Yeah.
it's like, oh, that was a really good dream. Falls back asleep. Sounds like
Mhm.
half the people I know getting ready for work. I
Yep.
don't know.
Well, anyway, so essentially the Hindu model, this is the basis of the Hindu model, essentially, and Buddhism retains this model and fuses it with the organic model. Mahayana Buddhism does.
Yeah.
Theravada, to a certain extent, but Theravada is much older. Some people might compare Theravada and Mahayana to, depending upon who you talk to, they'll say either Theravada and Mahayana are like um, Catholics and Protestants,
Hmm.
or they'll say no, it's more like Jews and Christians.
Okay.
Like, yeah, I see merits for both arguments, but they're also kind of their own thing. Theravada is a heavily monastic, almost individualist tradition, whereas Mahayana is a large populist movement. Um, so
I
to
like the comparison to Judaism and Christianity there then,
yeah.
because Judaism, I know it's still considered a very large religion, but I always see it as like this very small niche thing compared
Mhm.
to religion.
Yeah, no, totally makes sense.
So one of the things that interests me is
Hmm.
um there's there's linguistic things that you were doing there that
Hmm.
I'm not sure, because you were talking about um everything got created because Brahma recognized it exists and it necessitated the existence of something else, right?
Yes, though
This
I wouldn't. Don't take that too piously or too
Right,
literally.
right. But I really like it as a story because there's a
Hmm.
linguistical problem with it. There's a huge, and it's one of the things I really, really love about religion.
Hmm.
And because you were talking about it happening with Christianity, although you never specifically mentioned it as a linguistical problem, we have a linguistical mechanical problem that just sort of gets handed off to the next generation because we were made by God, and
Hmm.
so we continue to think in terms of made. Even when
Yes,
we give up God, we keep made.
made. Yeah.
And I'm like obsessed with the way um the like when you speak Italian, you only think Italian.
Yeah.
Um and
Do you speak
when
Italian?
no, but it's
Because
just a
I was born in Italy. I used to speak
ah
Italian fluently with a Sicilian accent. So I just love that you brought that
yeah,
up.
it's well, it's a dumb little joke that I have in my head. It's like when you speak Italian, or when you speak Italian, you think Italian, and when you speak, I think it's Japanese, you think women are eggs. Because the word
That's funny.
Kimmy or
Yeah.
Kimi, yeah. um, because it's one of those things, like when you speak a specific language, and
Hmm.
Americans are really really bad for this. I am an American, I only speak one language, but I'm painfully aware of how much that limits my philosophical understanding of the world because
Yep.
I only know one language. The greatest gift I can give to philosophy is ignorance, because I only have this one very narrow frame of the world. I can't think in Japanese, in any
Hmm.
of the numerous Congolese dialect. I can't even think in Creole. I would be afraid to meet anybody who can think in Creole.
Hmm.
Um, but I like this idea of this narrative version of reality because
Hmm.
um it might be like a oh boy, it might be like a old Jewish sect thing. It might have just been me learning about religion and reading too many D&D books at the same time. But I'm familiar. I've become familiar with a thing that happened in with the words abracadabra, alakazam.
Hmm.
Um, do you know what those words mean?
Oh, I feel like I did at one point, but I've forgotten. So tell me.
As I speak, so I create. These are the first words spoken by God as he brought reality into creation.
Oh,
Abracadabra,
I
alakazam.
like a Zam.
Yeah. And mind you, those are not the exact words. Those are, of course, a bastardization of a bastardization of an ancient myth,
Yeah.
as is everything in the modern world. But,
But also, that's really fascinating because so if you if you're familiar with Alan Moore, the other anarchist comic creator with long hair, yeah, Alan Moore has this theory that language and art
mhm.
are literally magic.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Like, that's the music of this. So I was actually I was rolling
Mhm.
through that because the thing is this old tradition in Judaism, or again, I might have been reading too many D&D books while learning about Judaism, but from what I understand, this whole the first sentence in create the first word spoken in creation as God brought all into being, abracadabra like Shazam, that is a sort of setup for all of life is a story being told continuously by God, which is sort
Mhm.
of a bastardization of like another religious thing known as the music of the spheres. This was a thing in ancient Greece, if I remember correctly, where
Mhm.
reality is sort of a story being told set to music.
Mhm.
Um, boy, it's been so long since I've actually read up on the music of the spheres. Uh,
I'll have to look into that because that feels like something I know,
yeah,
um,
it
or
has
something
a
I've heard of.
it
Mhm.
has a lot to do with platonic forms and like all of reality set to music. It's all moving and
Well,
flowing and
yeah. Well, that's ironically enough, that's very close to my Buddhist sect because our whole thing is chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo as the core rhythm of the universe, and also Hindu music also has a concept in it which is a drone. It's that thing you hear where it's like a "wah" in the back of
yeah,
every Hindu song, and that symbolizes Brahman,
that's
like
awesome.
the unifying presence of Brahman. So essentially, like, to go with Buddhism as a religion and how to respond to these problems of being a person, being a complicated human being that is self-aware and is aware of its own mortality. Um, that's one of the biggest questions that we possibly have in all of philosophy is like how do I fit in? What is this? Um, and so the way that Siddhartha Gautama went to deal with this, obviously, you have the original story of the Buddha where he is confronted with the the inescapable tragedies of the world, and he goes out, he learns from all of these masters who tried to deal with it. He attempts hedonism, he attempts strict asceticism, where he nearly dies by starving himself, and then eventually he becomes enlightened under the Bodhi tree, which is that's why I said you were correct when you pronounced Buddhism as Bodhism, because it is Buddhism under the tree.
Yep.
Um, so Buddha, it's a title. It means awakened one. The Buddha is the man who woke up. Um, and it's very important in Buddhist cosmology because there are supposedly, because it's coming out of the Hindu thing with all these gods and devas and stuff, like, yeah, these gods exist in a sense,
Yeah.
um, but that's actually, like, gods can't be enlightened. Devas cannot be enlightened. Or if you look at it like this, people whose lives are overflowing with fortune and pleasure cannot be enlightened. They enjoy it, but they're too happy.
Oh man, actually, that is one of my favorite things from Buddhism. I want to say is the
Mhm.
sattva.
A
Um,
bodhisattva.
yeah, the sattva, the people who are just like, I've learned so much from being alive. I cannot let myself leave this world.
Hmm.
I really like those people because
Yeah.
I think they're bullshit. Because
Well.
that
Mhm.
to me, if I were to take this like detached approach from religion, which
Mhm.
because I'm not Buddhist and I haven't grown up within the tradition, I can easily do, also because I'm conceited, um, I can easily see this being like, hey, I'm really rich, but I want to convince people I'm a good person. So I'm gonna come. I'm also powerful within the monastic orders or within the dynasty at the time. So
Mhm.
no, it's not that I'm not corrupt. I'm this close to enlightenment, but I keep my worldly possessions, my wealth and my spices, my ample
Mhm.
food, not because I'm corrupt or of the earth or whatever. No, it's so I can re-enter the reincarnation cycle to help you. This
Well,
sounds like every
yeah.
snake oil salesman.
There's kind of a version of that. So yes and no. A bodhisattva is that's a concept specifically in Mahayana Buddhism that does not exist in Theravada Buddhism.
Right.
Um, Mahayana Buddhism being, and to tell you the truth, my sect actually does consider all of its members bodhisattvas of the earth. So from the SGI's point of view, you're talking to a bodhisattva right now. Now, the thing about
Whoops.
bodhisattvas. Mhm.
I was just laughing and I said whoops.
Yeah, no, it's fine, because what you're pointing out is a reality too, and it's valid. And I can actually see people using that concept in that way. I could even see the concept being developed in that way.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, from a Buddhist standpoint, it wouldn't matter.
Yep.
So here's okay. So how do we understand? And you were talking before about nihilism with the knowledge of death and all of the suffering that we have to endure within this world. Existence is dukkha. The first noble truth. Dukkha being translated as suffering, but it's really more like a all-pervading sense of dissatisfaction and ennui because we know that things end because of thirst, tanha, because of clinging. Um, so a good way to understand this is Sundays are less sweet because you know you have work in the morning.
Yep.
That is a good way of understanding dukkha. So all of existence is dukkha. Like it pervades everything because ultimately everything changes, everything ends, everyone dies. Um, how do we deal with this? Well, the way that Buddhism has traditionally dealt with this is through a series of, dialectical exercises between mentor and disciple. Philosophical inquiry, essentially, and also religious practice. In my sect, the chanting of Nam Myoho Renge Kyo is very effective for that. There's also sects called Mantrayana. Zazen is another way of trying to bring the individual, the practitioner, to the point where they experience actual reality as opposed to the everyday world that you and I experience, the world of our senses, the world of I, the world of the ego.
Right.
So, yeah. So, what's important to understand about this is first off, there's a very important concept in Buddhism that does not exist in Hinduism. Or I think there are some sects of Hinduism that it exists, but the concept is anatman. Atman being the self, the soul, in kind of the individual sense. So when reincarnation was first explained to me by my mother, she kind of explained it in a way that a Westerner would understand, where it's like, okay, well, if you're a dog and you're a really good dog, well, then maybe you get reborn in a higher form. And then if you're bad in that form, maybe you get knocked down and you're like a bug or something, you know? And this is even understood in certain like Buddhist countries. Like there have been, I talked to like this Christian pastor in Malaysia, and he was talking about how his sect was working to kind of rescue some people from prostitution. And one of the things that the pimps would say was, "Oh, you were terrible in a past life, so now you have to serve me." And people would take that as justification. That is illiterate when it comes to actual Buddhism because of the concept of anatman. So, like anarchy, no atman. So, Buddhists at the beginning are like, there is no self, there is no soul, there is no essence to any human being. So, if you imagine, like, you take imagine you've got you're peeling away layers of a fruit trying to find the pit. Humans are like onions. There is no pit. There's just more peels, and then boom, nothing.
You peel away every layer of the onion to reveal there's never been an onion there to start with.
Yeah, exactly. The onion was an illusion. Now, a Westerner who is very, their whole concept of the world is about the ghost driving their body. You know, you tell them that there's no ghost, and they either don't believe you or they freak out and can get overcome with despair. But hang on, let's push through that. Because if there's no self and no, what are you? Like one of the big questions, that's one of the first questions that like a Zen master will ask someone is like, who are you? And the person will respond, oh, well, my name is such and such, and I was born as a, no, I didn't ask what your name was. I asked, who are you? And they're like, okay, well, I did this and this, and I'm this old, and those are a bunch of facts about you. Who are you? Show me you. And of course, there is no answer to this question. He's just trolling you. But the point is,
I love the idea of spiritual guidance by a troll.
Oh yeah. Buddha does that all the time. If you read the sutras, yeah,
that was
Buddha is a troll.
That was actually one of the things that interests me, because the character of the trickster, of the fool, the trickster and the fool appear quite often in mythology, and it's like a universal thing, right?
Yep.
So even so far that worlds couldn't touch, right? So I'm talking about, you have in Norse mythology, you have Loki. In some Western mythologies, there's like Raiden and Susanoo and
Prometheus.
And there's Prometheus and Hermes. And there's a character called Quetzalcoatl in Azteca, which,
or Coyote, I think.
Coyote as one of the names and faces of the Ananse, which technically a trickster. Yeah, no, I definitely a trickster. And so the idea of Buddha as hold on, because I'm trying to think of which one it is. Because I know there is like one of the Buddha is specifically sort of known among them as more of a trickster.
Mm.
And I can't,
There's
or maybe it's
there's
just the like grinning Buddha or laughing
oh,
Buddha or
you're
something.
thinking of Budai or Hote,
Okay.
who is supposedly there's some so he was probably I have you're talking about this guy.
Yeah, except
Yeah, yeah. So
there's like
he
a more
mhm,
no, hold on. I was about to say a more malicious version
mhm,
of that, except it's not malice. It's like it is the trickster, right?
yeah,
Um, eh,
absolutely. I think I know what you're getting at with that archetype, and the Buddha definitely does inhabit that a lot. Um, it's very important with the concept of expedient means, which is the key sutra for my sect is the Lotus Sutra, and the fourth chapter of the Lotus Sutra is the one that goes over expedient means. I chant parts of that, like in my meditation. Like, hang on, I got my freaking liturgy right here.
and
This is the old version.
my apologies if it feels like I'm like pulling us around wildly like a dog. This is
No, no.
genuinely how I think. And plus, I've heard some of your other conversations.
Mhm.
You are prone to going on a bit.
Well, I got ADD.
Yeah.
I'll do that.
Well, also you're a performer, so
Hmm.
you can never fault a performer for taking their stage time.
Certainly, my mother, when my mom was pregnant with my brother, she actually had a nightmare that he came out talking. So,
That's
are you there?
fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I have to work on being a bit quieter when I'm here, because my roommates are asleep right now. So,
Ah,
yeah, which is why you heard me laughing and then suddenly just stop.
okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Um, yeah. So Hote Budai, he's associated with Maitreya, the Buddha of the future. Though that's really kind of getting into the weeds about like specific Buddhist deities and what was a basically like a local god that got promoted to a Buddha
Nice.
or whatever. Um, but so what I'm getting at here with regards to so if the self does not exist and the only thing that passes from life to life is karma, doing, what is reincarnation? Why is that happening? Well, again, very obvious that if you have the world and the world births consciousness, the earth peoples the universe eyes, well, then what is being reincarnated? What is being incarnated? The answer is everything. Literally the entirety of existence. And so that means essentially that because we have no inherent essence, we're not actually separate from the universe. We are the universe. Or as Alan Watts puts it, if I am my foot, I am the sun. Um, he'll point this out by pointing out that, for instance, just by virtue of being a conscious organism, we call into being the entire universe of light and color and hardness and heaviness and everything. Without an ear, sound it's just vibrations. It's the ear that transforms that into sound. Similarly, light is just particles or waves until an eye transforms it into light. Um, and so, really, suddenly it's not, oh, I'm just little me in this body, the slave to these greater forces in this uncertain universe. I am the universe, all of it, I. And then, of course, you suddenly realize once that happens, there's not actually anything that can go wrong. And that's really what nirvana is, when you understand that and you are able to perceive like the oceanic feeling, because like everyone is actually already everyone has already experienced this. We experienced it when we were babies, and a newborn baby does not perceive any difference whatsoever between its environment and what happens to it. It's all just one united process. And then we lose that as we grow up and we learn to speak and we learn culture and all this other stuff. We forget the actual truth of existence. So once you know that, you exhale, you blow out, which is what the word nirvana means. It is the blown out state, as in, phew, like I thought I was dealing with something really serious, but actually I'm not. Because you literally can't die, not forever. And not only that, you get to have your cake and eat it too. You get to be all of the saints and all of the sinners and all of the heroes and the villains, and also the rocks and the trees. And you get to experience it in a million forms, and a million trillion different possibilities and combinations, and sometimes the same combination. Again, because we are ultimately Brahman. That's who and what we were before our parents conceived us. You know, that's sort of the answer that ultimately the student of Zen will come to, but they won't come to it in words, because you really can't put that universal of a realization into words or to language, because you're abstracted beyond that. So ultimately, this is another reason why my sect, sometimes gets accused of being just way too happy about things. But like, what's there to be sad about? And as you become enlightened, as you go through this process, suddenly the discords of your life and the discords of people's lives stop being a source of fear and dread, but actually become a part of the overall joy of life. And it's been likened to surfing, you know? So ultimately, I think that a lot of times is where the Buddhist nihilism and Eastern nihilism is so fundamentally different than Western nihilism, because Western nihilism still thinks the individual is real as opposed to an illusion. Which is not to say that, I'm not here and you're not here. It's just that, like, we're the exception and not the rule. The exception is us existing. The rule is us not existing / existing as something else. So, you really can't die.
See,
Everyone is I, and they're all you.
so I've got um I've got some issues with like that framing of the world, because
Mhm.
I've been brought up by this inherently conceited and
Mhm.
individualistic sort of philosophical brand.
Mhm.
Um, and the whole idea of seeing everything as one, um, if I were to apply any sort of moral or ethical framing to it, it feels like it would minimize everything. If I Because I would view it all through um the contiguous nature of nature. um it because it sounds like the logical conclusion is something like I'm I think I'm willing to say ecofascism.
Ego fascism or
Eco
eco fascism? How
eco
so?
because if you cannot truly die so long as something exists, then your only objective is to maintain something, not any individual
Uh,
thing. It's
mhm.
something. It's we if I destroy the planet, then I am a virus. If poor people destroy the planet, I should make sure the planet continues to exist.
Hmm.
Do you see
So
how this
yeah.
the line that you it sounds like you've laid out leads
Hmm.
down that sort of a way? And I think though, um,
Well, hang on. There's a problem that I understand that it's leading down that route,
mhm.
but that's because you think existence and non-existence are different. They're not.
No, no, they don't actually have to be.
Yeah,
Just cognitive beings have a bias
conscious. Yeah.
uh, cognitive beings have a bias
Hmm.
for cognition,
Hmm.
right? I'm going to say, I think I can fairly comfortably say anything that thinks it exists wants to continue thinking and existing.
Certainly.
Um,
And everything that exists will fail at that,
yeah,
no matter what it
and
does.
but the thing is, like, so if I follow the line, if I am a thinking thing that
Hmm.
believes it exists, and even if I see no difference between existing and not existing, right? Um, and this is a thing I know Buddhism has actually dealt with in the past, because Buddhist terrorists have been a thing,
And
and
fascists have been a thing.
yeah,
Yeah. No. No. Everyone is vulnerable to. I mean, they're Mara essentially, which is not a literal being, but the sort of incarnation of desire,
yeah,
of clinging, associated with the devil, my sex, the worst thing in my sect, which is the devil king of the sixth heaven. And the devil king of the sixth heaven is on my Gohan zone when I chant to it, like along with a number of other things. Like it's a part of me, it's a part of you. So yeah.
like, and this isn't to disparage Buddhism, because I
Hmm.
mean, every religion sort of has its devils, if you would. And
Hmm.
it sounds like, eco-fascism would be one of the many devils of Buddhism, much like
I mean, you've
extremist pacifism would be sort of
yeah.
a devil of Buddhism, because that's one that I've listened to people grapple with, is that
Hmm.
the principle of extreme pacifism, which I know isn't like an explicitly I from what I understand is not like an explicitly stated thing, but like pacifism being generally promoted. How do I promote pacifism? Um, a really great way to make sure somebody never attacks anyone:
Hmm.
break their hand.
Uh, I mean, I sort of get what you're getting at there, but it's so. First off, we can talk about how a philosophy might go wrong,
Yeah,
um, but again, if we are the universe experiencing itself, for there to be something, there must also be nothing. This is I did a video, I think I sent it to you, which was Sunyata, the void, and
yeah.
how nothingness is actually like the not the primary uniting factor of everything in the universe is emptiness. And that's when you get in like the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness and emptiness is form. You want to think about this and remember when I said at the beginning, when we're talking about um, death, waking up, realizing that it's death and that
Yeah.
causing the separation in the universe, that hints at a concept in Buddhism called dependent origination. And the idea is essentially that things do not enter the universe in a causal relationship. Rather, they enter in a polar relational relationship. So rather than being caused, if one thing exists, its inverse exists. In much the same way of if I put a drawing on a piece of white paper, your mind will instantly look at the drawing and see and pick that out because we've evolved to do that. But is the drawing really separate from the white paper? No, it's not, because you couldn't see. There would be nothing for the drawing to go on, and you couldn't see it. without the whiteness behind it. Somethingness and nothingness are ultimately existing in a polarity. They are
Um,
not different things, they are the same thing.
okay, so just so you're aware that your example didn't actually work there. Because nothingness wasn't created from you drawing a picture. It's actually it's one of the fun. So okay, I'm trying to
Well,
take
the nothingness, a lack. I'm using the paper as a metaphor. It's not
right,
exactly a one-to-one thing for nothingness. But
right. It's
continue.
but the thing is, I'm a, I was talking about trickster gods earlier. The thing
Mm-hmm.
is, the trickster and the fool
Mm-hmm.
are insanely important to me. Were I to carry any religious name, it would be
Mm-hmm.
the trickster. Um,
Cool.
not because I. Okay, I was about to say not because I like to lie to people, but I would be lying there. I do like to lie to people. It's fun, but it should always be done for a purpose. It should always. And
Mm-hmm.
the thing is, the trickster is the fool. Um, hold on. I need to not go off on that because I'll just ramble. Um, but
That's fine.
so
Those are really really interesting.
the
What's it called? Archetypes.
the interesting thing for me is
Mm-hmm.
that you take this perspective on Buddhism, but
Mm-hmm.
then you create, and it doesn't leave a blank space. It's not like there's anything that goes missing when you print another copy of Snow White Zombie Apocalypse. Sure, that paper can't be used again, or you might think it can't, but I mean, it could, in a
I
quite a literal sense. And
Well, there is something that does go missing,
okay,
and it's the emptiness that existed when Snow White Zombie Apocalypse didn't exist. Like before this comic was a thing, it wasn't a thing, and so like the nothingness is what goes missing, but it doesn't really go. Like they talk about in Buddhism when they talk about nothingness, it's they'll say stuff like you can't hammer a nail into nothingness.
right,
But
right,
like the way they understand it is more like the sky. Like the sky is empty, but is it empty? No, it's filled with clouds and lightning and birds and people, because there's no actual differentiation between the sky and the
yeah.
air around us. It just seems like that to us. So
Actually, oh god,
like something must have nothingness to exist, in much the same way that like if I filled this room up with boxes, I couldn't come in here and stream with you because it would already be full.
and I'd just be streaming with a bunch of boxes.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so the point is, and the analogy with the paper and the drawing on the paper is, are you focusing on our brains naturally want to focus on the thing, but the lack of the thing is as important as the thing.
Right.
And as a direct result, we can't really consider lack and having something as separate. Form is emptiness and emptiness is form. It
Right.
just appears to us otherwise.
And to put it in like the rudest way possible, this conversation is an hour and 30 minutes of my life I'll literally never get back.
Yeah.
That's not to put you down. That was literally just trying to word it in the rudest way possible.
Well, thank you for that. But no, exactly. But of course, we never can get anything back,
Right. Right.
except until we do.
And
I've had this is so I had a thought once, and it sort of went like this. Okay, so all of the atoms and everything in the universe kind of all came together in a very very specific way that led to Brent and Lengel being born in the year in the early 80s and living out his life in a very certain way where I am right now, right?
yeah.
And we think that this will never happen again, that we only have this. But if we take as our operating principle that one, change is the only universal constant, then eventually the state of you or me not existing as we are will also end. It will also change, which means given a long enough time frame, I will come back and live my life exactly the way that I lived it right now. And I'll probably also live it in an infinite number of variations on that life. And then, I'll also live it as, the desk and as you and as the freaking fox outside, and as my son and everything else. So really, we we cannot help but spend our time. We can't not give away and burn our life. It's the only thing that we can do. We can only move forward. Um, but similarly, I really don't think it is as big of a tragedy as it appears when we are so stuck in our life and in our perspective that we're unable to see the larger picture. Um, in fact, I think again it's far more harmonious. So, like you talked earlier about, like the outcome of eco-fascism, to trying to make things exist as long as possible to prevent stuff from not existing. I mean, okay, you can do that, but like, one, are you going to be happy doing that? And two, is it actually going to change anything in the long run? No, it's not. Like, even if the eco-fascists win and, I don't know, install whatever weird green Reich that they're trying to do, like, yeah, okay, and then that's gonna end. And we'll all do something else. So, I think that, like, again, it's that nothing can be held on to. Nothing can be preserved. Everything changes all the time. And, so stop worrying about it so much and just kind of
uh,
enjoy the ride is at least that's
I'm
my way of taking it.
I'm with you all up until that very end bit, because the
Mm-hmm.
thing is, like the whole, everything will end. If this is the Gary Johnson, in the long run, the sun will explode and consume the entire Earth. That's why we
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't worry about fossil fuels. This sort of like that sentiment.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus, sorry, my brain fixates a lot
Yeah.
on stuff. So,
I mean,
but
you could not worry about it, but I like being alive. And I think that, there's a lot of other beings that enjoy that
well,
too.
yeah,
So,
and
yeah.
that's actually like, I don't know if it doesn't actually sound like Eastern religions are all that different from Western religions when you really get down to it, when you get to what you would use to motivate. There's definitely linguistically structural differences, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you have always thought that um divinity grows instead of being created, um
Mm-hmm.
in the West we were taught the lineage was forged and it's brought handed down from father to son, where instead it sounds like listening to the teachings of the Tao and of the Buddha and so on, that it does sound like it's a more organic, the
Yeah.
lineage
The great,
grows.
yeah. I mean, the difference. The great Tao flows everywhere, both to the left and to the right. It loves and nourishes all things, but does not lord it over them. And when merits are accomplished, it lays no claim to them.
Yeah. Man, it actually, it fascinates me that I haven't learned of a, a Japanese or Chinese Camus.
Oh, they're out there.
Like, eh, the idea that they wouldn't have had that sort of nihilist renaissance,
Mhm.
um or that it wouldn't be as popularized is really, really strange, because it does sound
Hmm.
like um it honestly, it just doesn't sound that different to me from Western religions. It, of course, this is also with me having that like background radiation of like Confucianism, um,
Hmm.
and the Council of Supreme Masters and so on,
Yeah.
like just
Well, the
floating in the
Confucianism,
back of my head.
yeah. Confucius, and I did have to read the Analects for my Eastern philosophy class. Confucius always struck me as a primitive Anlanders. Like he's fundamental to Chinese thought,
Yeah.
but like, oh my god, it was the least fun one for me to read. Um, so, like, I mean, if we're going to talk about Taoism, and Taoism in particular is difficult to wrap your head around.
Hmm.
You know, Taoism, Buddhism is essentially about bringing about a change in consciousness within the practitioner. Um, and basically, its project is to get us to stop clinging, you know, to
Right.
stop clinging to our lives, to stop clinging to existence, to stop wanting things to not change because they're just going to change and you're just driving yourself up a wall. um, you know, one of the big important things that you kind of realize, you know, as a Buddhist, is that samsara is nirvana. There, you don't go somewhere else. It's here right now, and we can experience it as hell on earth or heaven, if or whatever. This is right now. This is what there is and what there will always be. Um, Now, Taoism takes a similar tack to that, but rather than by trying to achieve this change in consciousness by action, they do the opposite,
Yeah.
and they try to achieve it by non-action.
It,
um,
except like that's, oh man, sorry, Taoism. I'm utterly fascinated by it because it's not inaction.
yeah.
It's not. It's Wu Wei. It's
Hmm.
action without action. And
Yeah.
honestly, the way I came to understand Wu Wei is actually
Hmm.
something I sort of resent that I'm not capable of. Have you ever
Oh,
gotten
not
drunk
yet.
and well, it's a thing that I've been trying very hard. Have you ever gotten drunk and gone dancing?
Quite frequently.
Yeah,
I'm a goth. I get, yeah,
that's what I understand. The feeling of Wu Wei.
yeah.
If you wanted a practical way to feel it, to feel the Tao, it would be go out, go out to a place that has a DJ that's got music you enjoy,
Hmm.
and don't dance, just move with the music.
Hmm.
It's honestly,
You don't have to be drunk to do that, but
yeah,
yes.
yeah. It's but
There
the
is
Tao,
there was a Zen painter, who, the way he was a monk, and the way he would do his painting was he'd just get incredibly drunk,
yes,
and while he was drunk he would use his own hair like as his brush.
yeah. He would
And
like dip it entirely in the ink, and he would
mhm,
dance.
yep,
Yeah.
that was how he created his art. Brilliant. I don't know if I'd want to get drunk that often, but like, but
Honestly,
yeah.
that shit
so
sounds
so to
great.
just, yeah, essentially the whole Wu Wei thing, yeah, effortless action, to act in a completely um genuine way,
Hmm.
with regard, you know, and in a way that is really kind of what the Zen master is asking when he asks the question, like, who are you? Really, he's asking for a completely genuine act, which is, of course, they call this like swallowing a ball of iron. You can't do a completely genuine act on command. It's not possible, you know. Um, so trying to be genuine and to dance naturally,
Yeah.
you know, it can be done. It's incredibly difficult, um, but it's definitely there. So I totally get what you're getting at with
Yeah.
that. And yeah, that's a good way of explaining Wu Wei, actually.
I one of my favorite things about Wu Wei is when uh listening to a stuffy British person talk
Hmm.
about how Wu Wei is often likened to the best parts of being drunk. And
Hmm.
just listening to a stuffy British person say that is fantastic.
I had a feeling I'd had a couple of beers a few nights ago, and I was at a very good point of the drunk, and
Yeah.
I was kind of like, okay, yeah, no, this is samadhi, which is a type of meditation, and children live in samadhi.
Okay.
That's why kids tend to be intensely happy a lot of the time, and it's something that adults often are a bit resentful of, that we have a difficulty and have kind of lost that capacity. But also, like, what's really important is that, like, I was sitting on my porch the other day and I was watching the the pollen rain down from the trees in just like the right way,
Mhm.
with the sun kind of beaming over the hill. And it actually even kind of reminded me a little bit of some of the descriptions of the Buddha land in um, the Lotus Sutra.
Okay.
There's talking specifically about Mandarava, like cherry blossoms raining down, and these weren't cherry blossoms, but there was something very similar to what I had imagined when I saw this. And Nichiren Daishonin, the monk who started my sect back in the year 1200 when they were trying to execute him, um, he wrote at one point, like, what is a Buddha land but a land where a Buddha dwells? And essentially, again, making the argument, samsara is nirvana. We just don't notice that, because ultimately we are all the Buddha. Um, Again, that's another reason why you wouldn't want to. You fall into the trap of ego when you think that you can gain at someone else's expense, because you can't, because they're you. So you're just fighting yourself.
Right.
um, it's fundamental darkness that makes us think otherwise. It's the fact that we think we're separated. Um, so, like, I guess what I'm getting at about that with Wu Wei, with um, you know some of the Buddhist meditation practices, attempts at reaching nirvana, and satori, which is one of the first major enlightening experiences that the Zen school tends to reach for, is that kind of moment of ego death, where our our experience expands out and we realize, this is perfect, actually, and I don't have to survive. And I think that's, to bring this back to where we started at the beginning. I think that might have something to do with the comfort that you find in the notion of suicide as an option,
Mhm.
you know um, because when you realize you don't have to survive, living stops being a task. It stops being a weight around your neck as much. Um, so I think ultimately, I really, I think the stuff that you found, like in Camus, and in these, otherwise depressing philosophies, is very real and very valid. Um, and I think it definitely does dovetail with a lot of what I've learned studying Buddhism and practicing meditation and chanting over the years. Um, so yeah, I guess.
So
Mhm,
there's actually I guess a bit of a potentially a criticism I have of
mhm.
Buddhism, or even
Let's hear it.
Taoism and Confucianism, that
Mhm,
actually doesn't apply to Western philosophy as much, because one of the things Western philosophy has done really, really well is overthink itself.
mhm. Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and that might even be part. It's definitely where like deconstruction came in, right?
Mhm.
I mean, is there even a Eastern equivalent to deconstruction? And if not, do you have, would you be willing to speculate on your own as to like why not? Because like,
I mean, I'd say Zen is kind of close to tell you the truth.
does it specifically critique the way philosophy is done?
Zen? Oh hell yeah, yeah. Zen is. I don't study Zen, so I don't. It's not. It has not been my practice, but it's something that I'm quite aware of. I'm actually working my way through the Gateless Gate right now, which is phenomenal and weird. Um, but yeah, I think the Zen school in general really heavily critiques the way that philosophy is done. I mean, like to the point to where they will go so far as to it's almost it's traditional in a Zen school that if you talk about something in a spiritual way, they will respond with something completely commonplace. And if you talk about something that's just absolutely commonplace and everyday, they will respond with something heavily spiritual. Um, Example might be they might say like, what is the what's the true nature of the Buddha? And like a Zen monk will respond, a dried dung scraper. You know, um, or similarly, like you might have the absolute inverse of that, where you just are talking about like, I don't know, what are we going to eat for lunch? You'll get this like beautiful freaking poem about the nature of the universe and existence.
So now,
Yeah.
if th- this is probably going to come across a bit rude, but
Hmm.
it sounds like you haven't either been exposed to much Eastern philosophy, which is self-critiquing,
Hmm.
or you're not perhaps used to internalizing that sort of critiquing philosophy. Is this correct?
Self-critiquing how?
Um, because like when I think of Western philosophy, a
Hmm.
lot of Western philosophy is about challenging Christianity. It's about
Hmm.
challenging, quote, religion as a whole, as a concept.
Hmm.
Um, and then you get to the next level of like postmodernism, where it's deconstructing society and politics and all of that.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, at least thinking about the Eastern philosophy and the Eastern religious traditions, at least you haven't been exposed to that sort of thing from an Eastern perspective. Is this accurate?
Um, I mean, I think you can. There are certain sects. One of the guys that I talked to was a former monk from the forest tradition.
Okay.
And like his whole like they'll ask you ask one of the forest monks like what's how do you live the good life, and he'll say be a worm. Um, like as far as like critiques of power and society, I mean, Nietzsche and Daishonin, that was why they tried to kill Nietzsche and Daishonin twice. Like he was a heavy critic of all of the Buddhist schools of his day. He went after Zen. He went after the Sacred Word School. He went after the Pure Landers. Like he essentially, was one of the most ardent critics of the socio-political establishment of his time. In the 1100s. I think Shakyamuni similarly also was heavily critical of the Hindu society that was around him. He found that there were, ultimately no answers in any of the religious teachers that he was learning from, and he had to eventually discover the truth himself under the Bodhi tree.
Right.
So, I would say that there are in the East, people are much more collectivist in
Right.
how they think, um, and relational. And as a result of that, I don't think you would have that type of critique manifesting in quite the very specific way that, say, postmodernism does, with freaking Foucault breaking everything down to power relations, and artistic movements like Dada, noise rock, that kind of thing. You don't really have that in the East. Um, at least, or if you do, I don't live there, so
Right.
maybe
Right.
there are probably some sects that are very, very similar, or hell, even sects that are that have been influenced by that aspect of Western philosophy.
That is.
But I do think that there is something about the Western emphasis on individualism and individuality that can lead to heavily motivated critiques. I also think in leftism that's a big thing. Self crit is
Yeah.
like huge with freaking Marxists.
So
Um,
that was actually sort of the direction I was about to head in, is like you managed to no, were you an anarchist before a Buddhist or the
I was
other
an
way
anarchist
around?
before I was a Buddhist. Yeah.
Okay, because I was about to say, how do you get from Buddhism to anarchism? Because uh, maybe not Buddhism itself, but
Mhm.
traditionally it tends to be very collectivist and to a certain fault authoritarian, at least insofar as it becomes influenced by Confucianism.
hmm Well, yeah, and I mean, like, there's issues with authoritarianism in Buddhism. I mean, my sect has had a huge split in the '90s, with their own priesthood. And the my sect's version of the story is the priests were a bunch of authoritarian fuddy duddies, which is almost definitely true because that's usually how priests are in general. So I'm somewhat more on my sect's side of that break. But like the way I kind of came to where I am, I was raised Catholic, um, but I was raised to be a little heathen, essentially. Like I think the first time my mother read me the story of Abraham and Isaac, she finished it by just being like, "I think that's a horrible way. That's like one of the worst things you could ever do to a parent. What the hell was wrong with God there?" Um, and I identified off and on as a Buddhist in high school, mainly just to troll Christians because I was in the Bible Belt for a while. Um, and then I moved to New York City, and things got very serious. My wife got sick. The woman who would become my wife got sick, like very seriously ill. We were very poor, had no health insurance, that kind of thing. And around that time, I became a pretty ardent and aggressive atheist. Um, and I got suckered by the new atheists. I actually named my cat
A
Hitchens. It was a perfect name for a cat, by the way.
yeah.
And I went through a period for a while 2010 to maybe 2014-ish. And there were a lot of factors in my life that were bringing me back to a point where I could have faith again. And I had a religious experience where suddenly my faith was back. Like it was something that I couldn't have imagined. And it was more of an ability. It's not like I believed in Jesus or anything, but I suddenly had faith, if that makes sense. It was just suddenly there with me and all around me. And I was like, okay, well, I got to do something with this. Well, I'm not going to be a Christian anymore. So I went and found a friend of mine who I knew was a Buddhist. And I asked him, I was like, hey, how do I do it? And he was the one that introduced me to Soka Gakkai and my practice. And I feel that the Buddhism both dovetails with my anarchism and with my activism, and also tempers it in a big way. Because when I was with Occupy in the streets chanting another world is possible, we got taken apart by the police, just utterly decimated, and then slandered in the media and every other aspect of it. The movement was completely defeated. And then I remember after, working through a lot of issues related to that, and regaining my faith and becoming a Buddhist and practicing with Soka Gakkai, we eventually had this 50,000 youth gathering. And when I came to that gathering, and I still have it somewhere actually, on the pamphlet of they're called 50,000 Lions for Justice, it has right at the bottom, another world is possible. And everything that we had been fighting for with Occupy was suddenly being projected to 50,000 youth in the United States across multiple cities. We filled the stadium in New York, and there were stadiums like that filled all over the place from Soka Gakkai. And it just kind of got me thinking, because Soka Gakkai was founded in the 1930s by a guy named, it was Makaguchi. Makaguchi was an educator who had been influenced by John Dewey, a Western philosopher. And he founded the Gakkai, it stands for Value Creation Society. He and his right-hand man, Joshi Toda, were put in prison by the Japanese emperor for refusing to acknowledge the emperor as a living god. Makaguchi was an old man. He died in prison. And Joshi Toda came out of that, was enlightened in prison, and took the Gakkai from nothing that had been completely destroyed by the Japanese fascists, and brought it to 750,000 households in Japan. And when he died, he went to Daisaku Ikeda, the current president, and told him that he had had a dream that Soka Gakkai had spread over the entire world. And, Sensei, he was able to bring it from 750,000 households in Japan to 192 countries, to now us being the single largest lay Buddhist movement in the world. Probably the largest Buddhist movement in the world, period. So there are specific things related to Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, to what it means to be a Buddhist, to be a bodhisattva of the earth. And these are not things that are specific to Buddhism. These are things that are universal to humanity, and appear in different forms and in different language and words. And to see that coming back again, to see Nam-myoho Renge Kyo resonating like it always does, like the drone in Hindu music. It's a very beautiful and very encouraging thing. Um, and so I really feel like, I guess, to kind of bring this all to a close, the point is that ultimately, as we move forward, like into the next century, regardless of what actually happens, regardless of whether the human race gets wiped out or not, um, I find a lot of comfort and a lot of inspiration in the knowledge that this all happens again and again, and ultimately, the flux of the universe, life itself, the purpose of being here is simply to be here. The purpose of living is the living. The purpose of dancing is the dancing, not necessarily to get somewhere. And this is just something that can't be extinguished. It can't be extinguished by death. It can't be extinguished by anything. It is what there is.
All right. Yeah. Let's see. That was a very long poetic answer. I apologize. Um,
It's hard to talk about this stuff. So yeah,
well, yeah. I imagine because religion is one of those intensely personal things that
Mhm.
you, despite how people like to tell themselves, you never embrace a religion from a point of facts and logic. No, you
No,
approach
certainly not.
religion because it brings something of value to your life.
Mhm.
And it sounds like for you, at the point where the religion came into your life, you got that sense of community and purpose. Um,
Yeah. Well, and this is what's really important, and one of the things I wanted to talk about when it comes to purpose. There is a big mistake that I think Western philosophy has made, in that we think that purpose is a property of something.
okay.
As in, like, if you could scan, so you discover the purpose.
Yeah.
Purpose is not a property of an object or an organism. Purpose is a judgment made by a mind about something.
Yeah, it's a post hoc thing.
Exactly. So there is no inherent purpose to anything, but that also means that purpose is whatever we want it to be, whenever we want it to be.
Yeah.
Um,
One of my
it's
favorite
very
examples.
existentialist. Mhm.
One of my favorite examples is a hammer doesn't become a hammer till it hits a nail. A pan
Mhm.
can become a hammer when it hits a nail.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
my phone can
No,
become a hammer when it hits a nail. Not a very good one, and probably only once, but
yeah. Well, like, yeah. So if people are, there's that joke in Rick and Morty where, like, there's the robot that Rick builds, and the robot asks him like three times, like, "What is my purpose?" And Rick finally like turns and he's like, "You pass butter," and the robot's like,
yeah,
"Oh my god."
honestly, I've always found the idea of purpose in living things to be rather silly.
Hmm.
Um, and one of one of the sentiments I found the most success um, in talking to religious individuals, when
Hmm.
what they're attached to is the idea of purpose,
Hmm.
is the sentiment, what if you've already failed, or what if you've already served your purpose?
Yeah.
Like, either of those is an absolutely, like, imagine still existing in a world where you were once a hammer but you've driven every nail.
Yeah.
You're now just a hammer, still a hammer.
Hmm.
Every nail is set in its perfect place, however, and now you just have to be a hammer.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things that I find, like, it's very it's very emotionally gripping for people who are very attached to the idea of purpose. It's like,
Hmm.
no, no, no nail needs pride, no nail needs driven, no board needs split.
Yeah.
Um, and it helps people sort of deconstruct the idea of purpose, especially as you start listing off the things a hammer can do.
Hmm. Other
Because
than drive a nail.
right, it's like, you were it, and mind you, it still attaches to the idea of being created for a
Hmm.
purpose. You were a hammer, but now you can make your own destiny, whatever. But
Yeah.
it's one of those things. It's linguistic convenience to
Hmm.
get a person to the point. You may not have any purpose. Actually, one of the greatest freeing moments for me was the embrace of muck chaos, just the fact that there is nothing. There doesn't
Yeah.
the idea of there being no purpose means that purpose is derivative. It comes out of
Hmm.
um Jean-Paul Sartre.
Yeah. Existence precedes essence.
Yeah. I love that shit because
Mhm.
like you were not made as a playwright. You wrote plays.
Yep.
Um, you know, I wasn't made as an idiot. I just decided to know nothing publicly.
Yeah.
People get so mad when I say that about myself because you hear the way I talk. I talk as though I know a lot of things, but that's one of the true gifts of an idiot. I can pretend.
Yeah. No, I totally get you. I think that's an awesome line, by the way. I don't know why anybody's getting mad at you. That's a very
It honestly, because people, when they listen to me talk, they like to assume I'm smart. And
Mhm.
it makes them feel dumb for me to say I'm dumb. And it makes them feel, it almost makes a person feel slighted to hear somebody who's smart say I'm an idiot. Because, like, if you think of me as smart, but you don't think of
Mhm.
yourself as exceptional at all,
Mhm.
I'm smart, you're not. Then I say I'm an idiot. What does that make you?
Uh,
It's one of those things that's like it drags on a person's ego really hard,
mhm.
which is why I do it, because antagonizing people is fun, but also philosophically important to make fun of people sometimes.
I will agree with that. Um, so yeah, so this has been fascinating. It is 1 o'clock.
It
Uh,
is.
yeah, so we should probably end it. But yeah, thank you for getting into this, and thank you for challenging me.
Yeah, no
A number of
problem.
times there. It's
If you would be interested in having a more combative debate, I am entirely up for that
Mhm.
because believe it or not, I have to work really really hard to not turn my stream into a debate stream. This is naturally who I am.
Mhm.
I love to argue with people. I have so many questions and all of them are dumb. Um, but I'm very confident in them and in any
Yeah.
challenge I make to a person.
Well, yeah, I've got a debates. I'm a little careful with. I've got a debate coming up with that freaking oh god, Hake, who works with what's his face, Jesse Lee Peterson on the
Oh my
25th.
god, that sounds awful.
Yeah, it's going to be. Oh, I don't even know why. But, I haven't done a debate in a little while, so it should be interesting. So I got to prepare for that. Um, yeah, I do a lot of competitive debates, mainly because I do also really love to argue. I'm a old school reply guy who just did it for so long that he eventually, started doing it in front of an audience. Yeah, well, I mean, maybe we can get into something more contentious. I don't know if I would call it a debate because, again, like I want to be very careful about what's a conversation and what's a debate as far
Right.
as
So,
extrovert. But
um,
yeah, it's something that I might be interested in.
any debate that I have is going to be much more emotively based, and
Hmm.
it's going to be I'm going to try to stick to doing deductive based on the conversation, pulling
Hmm.
what little bit of outside knowledge I have of fucking whatever, as I've done here, right? Because I don't think logic and reason is all that important to most people.
No,
It's
it's not. It's not.
yeah,
Everybody likes to think that that logic and reason is
yeah.
important.
I will own them with facts and logic, which means I feel rational.
Yeah. Oh God.
I put on my rational pants today.
Well, it's so there's a great Alan Watts thing where he actually just dissects that personality type, and it was freaking brutal.
Was
Like
Alan Watts involved with making the Tao of Pooh?
I don't know. He was heavily influential. I don't know if he made the Tao of Pooh. Um, Watts. So Watts was, in my opinion, he is like one of the only public intellectuals ever who is worth a damn.
Mm,
Like, and his stuff is so clear. And maybe it's also because I had a Buddhist background when I came into it.
mm-hmm.
I think if I had encountered him without that, I might have been like, oh, here's another woo guy, like,
Sounds like it.
going, yeah. But no, Watts is absolutely one of the best thinkers I think humanity has ever produced, and he has this phenomenal way of communicating very complicated Eastern philosophical points to Westerners who have no education in it whatsoever.
Right.
Which is almost impossible to do. Which also very good to fall asleep to.
Very nice voice
There are
then.
there's hundreds and hundreds of hours of his lectures on YouTube, but he did one where he basically talked about like the sort of Christopher Hitchens type person, like the rigorous person who goes in there and wants everything like hard nosed and clear cut, and ultimately like it's a personality type.
Yeah.
And so like when you get that, like I'm gonna own you with facts and logic, there is so much of that is posturing. I can't even. But yeah. So anyway, dude, been absolutely great to talk to you.
Yep.
This was really interesting, and thank you for letting me get into a lot of deeper stuff than I'm normally able to talk about. For one reason or another. So yeah. I guess thanks for letting me go on.
Yeah. Absolutely. And anytime you'd like to just come and chill and chat, you can just drop in. I try to hang out in the general chat every now
Mhm.
and again. If you're just looking for a place to chill out and whatever.
Yeah, well, it'll be difficult for the next couple of months. I barely have time to prepare for this debate. But yeah, I'm going to be launching 2 new comic series. One about anarchist Buenaventura Durruti, and one about the lives of non-player characters in role-playing games. I think I mentioned that maybe in the
Yeah.
last stream. But yeah, I got to build the Kickstarters for those. That takes for freaking ever. I've got to lock down my living situation and several other things. So, and plus, parent, and my son's about to go to school unless Delta variant comes in and wrecks everything.
Oh
So,
yeah.
yeah, I'm going to be pinched for the next 6 months or so, but I think probably after I come out of that, I may have more time. But anyway, yeah, great talking to you. Yeah, keep at it, and this has been a lot of fun. I look forward to the next time we do speak.
All right. Chat with you later.
Absolutely. All right. Bye.
So, I did enjoy talking to him. Um a part of me wishes that I could have been more combative. I of course have to keep my voice down a bit because my roommates are sleeping. What is this? What is that? Discord overlay. Oh, that's gotta be one of the links that I broke. Whoops. Um, I wish I could have been more combative, but of course, with my roommates sleeping, I've got to be more considerate of them because they work, and I would not want to be the reason they were kept up really late and then ended up having a miserable day at work. But because it would be fun to have a more combative religious discussion, um, talking about the philosophical implications of what the other person's saying. I love doing those. I enjoy exploring a philosophical concept into the weeds, go as far into it as you can, stake out, like, seek out as many bad points as you can, and see what a person's willing to own. That is so much fun to me. Um, and it's interesting, but that is going to be it for tonight. I hope that anybody who did get to watch enjoys the bonus stream. And that's going to be it for tonight. In the meantime, y'all just remember, nobody's cares. Thank you very much and good night.